I'm Tom Leonard, the university librarian, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back to the series on new directions. It's hard to think of anything accomplished in libraries in the past generation that has had a greater impact than JSTOR, now providing access to the back files of 773 journals for more than 3,000 libraries in 127 countries. The Andrew Mellon Foundation began funding this project in 1995 with Kevin Guthrie as its first employee. Kevin came to the assignment after earning degrees in civil engineering and business administration and founding his own software development firm. The retired president of Mellon said recently that if he knew in 1995 what librarians already understood about the difficulty of managing serial titles and securing best copies for digitization, they might well have fled from this challenge. This suggests what a great problem solver Kevin Guthrie is, and may indicate also that he too, in 1995, was either innocent or too smart to blurt out the truth that might have discouraged Mellon. Kevin has gone on to lead Ithaka, whose business it is to provide both research and strategic services to higher education. He serves on the board of JSTOR and ArtStore in addition to Ithaka. And I will leave it to him to reflect on how all of these institutions are changing libraries. His topic this morning is certainly essential to all of us in contemplating new directions for Berkeley's library. Who's in charge? Reflections on faculty and librarian surveys concerning changes in scholarly communication. Kevin, welcome back to Berkeley.
Thanks very much. That's very kind. I think I was naive, probably, is the best way of putting it. Back in 1995, I didn't have any idea. First thing, I'm not a librarian, but I've worked with and for librarians for a long time, so I try to think like a librarian as much as I can. I have so many different memories flooding into my head right now because in those very early days of JSTOR, the very first time I ever did a public presentation about JSTOR and the concept was here at Berkeley. And I learned something then that I've never forgotten. JSTOR sits in between publishers and libraries and scholars and faculty and users. It sits in the middle of that space. And I was invited to give this talk, and I was told it was to librarians. And so I kind of angled the presentation that way, not really thinking, again, I was being naive, that anybody could come. So, some of the things I said might have been a little sharp toward the publishers. And I heard about it afterwards. And I left that meeting and I said, we're going to have to come up with an approach and a strategy that's one strategy that you can use that and talk about that wherever you go, no matter who's in the room. And I've never forgotten that. And it's something that has stuck with me, in everything. And I kind of credit Berkeley with it because it was a really engaged discussion. Where both faculty and publisher representatives and libraries were all there. So I'm hoping that today, it's a relatively big group in a really great room, that you'll feel free to interrupt me. I've got this presentation set up in kind of chunks where we can talk a little bit about it at different, and break at different points. And so I really would encourage discussion. That's really what I'm trying to do. And at some level, I'm going to try to be a little bit provocative, hopefully not make anybody angry. But as I said before, I'm not a librarian, and I really come from a different perspective. Obviously, JSTOR has served librarians and libraries and faculty. Ithaka now is thinking hard about issues that affect your world, and I am kind of sitting on a rock, looking at the world from a different perspective. And I hope that proves to be helpful. At the same time, creates a little bit of energy in the room. The main thing I want to talk about today, the thing that's been sort of bothering me, or that I've been struggling with, really over over almost the whole time I've been working with Ithaka, which is now about 2.5 years, is that as we're like heading headlong into this transition to electronic materials and just really going down the hill now, there's really, from what we see, and now I'm not talking about Berkeley here, I'm just talking about what we see when we talk to lots of different places, there's no strategy. There's no strategy for trying to affect what the community wants. Now, you could take that at the highest level at the administration, but within the library too, and there's no strategy around the things that matter most to these different institutions. And by strategy, I don't mean, you know, months and months of a 5-year strategic plan. I mean, I'm pretty simplistic about these things. You know, what do you want to have happen in 3 years? What would you like the world to look like? And if you wanted it to look that way, what would you have to do? And a lot of the time it's about resources. It's about making a compelling case to get resources to be able to do something a certain way. And the reason I say it's pretty simplistic is that it really just comes from my background, which is always starting new things. I have a tendency to go back to try to start new things. And when you start new things, you kind of have to be really simple about it. You have to think, okay, this is the one thing that we're going to try to do, and this is how we're going to get the resources for it. So I just say that just to give you a little bit of my bias as I come into these things. Now, what I'm going to talk about today comes really mainly from some surveys we've done at Ithaka of faculty and librarians, and also some more in-depth interviews with faculty in one discipline, the discipline of economics. And the surveys were done, I won't go into a lot of detail about methodology, but the faculty surveys have been done in 2000, 2003, and 2006. And were done by a commercial firm that specializes in new media. It's a firm in San Francisco called Odyssey. And the effect of new media and electronic resources on consumers mainly, but they took their knowledge and their capabilities and applied them to our context and faculty. These were large-scale surveys. We sent out over 40,000 of these surveys to faculty all over the country. And the library survey was much smaller scale, but asked a lot of the same questions and was in 2006. So I put up these questions for discussion. Some of you are reading them. Those of you who have a good angle on the screen. But you know what I want to talk about are 3 broad general areas. One is the changing attitudes of faculty toward libraries and library services. Now, some of this last survey was in 2006. Some of this maybe is old hat for some of you. You already know it. I hope it's not yesterday's news and boring. But we'll try to present it in a way that is important. And I'm going to take a little closer look at economics because I think there's something to learn there. We're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the transition to electronic resources and how this fits into strategies around preservation and archiving, both for print and for electronic materials. And if you take all this together, if you think about it, access, the questions of how we're going to cancel subscriptions and move to electronic or put things offsite or deaccession materials, you put all these things together, they're all part of a library strategy around making a transition from the print world to the electronic world. And are we taking a holistic view, our library is taking a holistic view to prepare for that and actually try to lead that process so that the results and the outcomes are better for the community. So that's what I'm going to try to do. Now, okay, so faculty attitudes. We asked a lot of questions of faculty, and I'm only going to touch on a very few. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is the value of certain kinds of library functions. Now, in all 3 of these surveys, in 2000, 03, and 06, we asked the same set of questions around these 3 primary, what we set up as kind of primary areas. The library serves as a gateway, helping to enable access for research and learning. The library pays for the resources, and now I'm asking this question of faculty now. The library pays for the resources that I need, from academic journals and books to electronic databases. And the library is a repository of resources. It archives, preserves, and protects those resources. Okay, so 3 broad areas: access, purchasing, and archiving. Because we wanted to, which things did the faculty value? Well, the faculty value all of them. And these data right here are an answer to the question, how important is it to you that your library provides each of those following functions? And this is the percent rating each function as very important. So it's a 1 to 10 scale. These are 8, 9, and 10 answers. So these are very high bars. You see buyer is on the right, archive is in the middle, gateway is on the left. All pretty darn high, but if you look, the red bar is 2003, the blue bar is 2006. The buyer thing, there's no statistical difference. The archive's about the same. The gateway is dropping. Okay, so between 2003 and 2006, the faculty are perceiving the library as less important to the gateway, less important for the gateway function. That's not the whole story, because if you start to look at this by discipline, it starts to look even more interesting. So the library is valued differently by the humanities faculty. Here you see the bars are all straight across, all high in all three areas. Now here are the social scientists, and you start to see those groups, that starts to look like it's part of the driver toward that first chart where the gateway, and really I'm focusing on the left bar now, the left blue and red bar. Now here's the scientists, and you see in their case both it was lower to start and dropping more rapidly. And then here's another group, the economists. And the reason I pull out the economists is that back in 2000, the economists looked a lot more like the humanists than they did like the scientists. And when I say that, I don't mean just on this question. As I said, we asked a lot of questions, and when you analyze the data, certain groups kind of run together. They answer certain questions like how important is preservation, or how important is it that I have the print volumes, and those tend to run with things like the degree to which the content has images in it, or the content is has heavy graphics, or typical disciplinary breaks like humanities, social sciences, etc. The economics as a discipline has broken away from where they were to someplace different. They were on the humanities end of social scientists in a lot of the questions that we asked in 2000. They'd broken away from that, and now they're on the extreme ends of the scientists. So what I want to talk about a little bit is not so much what that means, but what can one learn from that? What's happening there? And if I were a librarian, I would be in there. I would be trying to figure out what's happening with them, and what do I have to do to be important to them going forward. So that's really one of the premises that I'm working from. So if I back up and just do this again, and I kind of animate it, it's kind of ugly. It's a little scary. So and these are. So this has often made me think about this issue of disciplines, where a lot of the time, of course, disciplines are different. They operate in very different ways. And I think that's a truism, and I believe it, and I think it's right. But sometimes that's a crutch, or at least it sounds like a crutch to me when I hear librarians talking about it. Because it's almost like, well, the humanists or this field will always need me as they need me now, because they're that discipline. And this is the story I think the economics field tells, is that it depends. It depends on, yes, the discipline is different, but what resources do they have available, and how is that changing? So I think that's just something to think about. I don't think that there's safety in disciplines. Okay, another set of questions we asked was around the starting point for research. So below are 4 possible starting points for academic research. Typically, when you're conducting academic research, which of these 4 starting points do you use to begin locating information? So the library building, we were trying to get at, do you go to the library and do you browse, and do you use the library catalog and then go find things? A general purpose search engine on the internet or World Wide Web, your online library catalog, or a specific electronic research resource or computer database. So here's the first chart. This was 2003, and its starting point is disciplinary groupings. Library building is on the bottom. Specific electronic research resource is at the top. So the library building is, and this is in sort of broad. I'm going to give more specific disciplinary breakdowns in a minute. But you see library building, online library catalog, and the more external databases and uses at the top. And you see that if you really what you want to do in this chart is group red and blue, which is kind of about the library, and yellow and black, which is kind of like the network resources. Okay, so that makes some sense, right? The sciences have the small red and blue, and it gets bigger as you move more toward humanities disciplines. Everybody on So here's the next chart, which is a little bit more specific about the disciplines. It starts with biological sciences, engineering, law, economics, sociology, classics, history, and philosophy. So I kept it in the same order with the sciences on the left, moving toward the humanities on the right. And this is 2006. Now, if I do that same thing and I go back and forth, if you look at blue and yellow, the scale's the same, it's roughly the same size, okay? So if I go back here and it go like this, you see the red and blue gets a lot smaller on the left, okay? So I'm just kind of cheating the graphics here. But the red and blue gets very small on the left in the sciences. The degree to which those folks are going to the library or using the online catalog is going down and is lower, and the black and yellow, black and gold bars are getting much, much bigger, driving much deeper on this chart. And once again, the economists are down there with the scientists. You see the difference between the economists, which is the fourth one from the left, and then sociology, classics, history, philosophy. So the point here is just that the disciplines are changing in their use. So I'll go through this a little bit more carefully. Here's starting point is the library building in 2006, all pretty low, not surprising to any of you, I'm sure. Here is the web search engine using Google, and again, I'm sorry, I should have said these are also 8, 9, 10 answers. So the top end of the answer is not the wide range. Here's online catalog, and here's a specific electronic e-research resource. So the shape of these is as you become more, as there are more resources available to you that are available on the network, you use them, and you use them in lieu of the other things you used to use. I mean, that's really the story, at least from my perspective. That's what I think the story is, and I'll welcome reactions. But it's not so much that I have some kind of broad-based commitment to use this thing or that thing. Give me what's easy, give me what's convenient, give something that matters to me. I'm going to use that, and I've only got so much time, so it's going to crowd out the other thing. So that's how I kind of look at that issue. So we asked very specifically, how do faculty perceive the importance of the librarian? And this particular chart is broken down by by institutional type, and these are JSTOR classifications, which are based on the Carnegie classification. Very large, or Research One universities like Berkeley. Even though faculty have easy access to academic content online, the role librarians play at this institutions is just as important as it has been in the past. That's the question. The role librarians play at this institution is just as important as it has been in the past. A little bit lower for research universities. So same question by discipline. Those darn economists. There, that one right in the middle there. Not as important as it has been in the past. This is a question that says, how dependent would you say you are on your college or university library for research you conduct? These are if you'd done this 15 years ago, I think the bars would be much higher, still in the 50% range, 40 to 50% range in the humanities over here, lower out there on the left. Thinking about 5 years from now, how dependent do you think you will be on your college or university library for research you conduct? So, this is not, for me, this is not extreme. I mean, it's going in the direction of, I'm going to use the library less, but it's not falling off a cliff. But that is the trend that these data show. So I'm going to pause for a minute. So what's the story here? Faculty are using the library. The library is still very important. The most important function provided by the library is seen to be the buying function. I mean, that stayed solid on both sides. 90% really high number. Yes, I want the library to pay for my stuff. No surprise there. The perceptions of the value of the library's gateway function have declined since '03, especially among scientists and economists, probably best explained by the availability of alternatives, new e-resources. Faculty perceptions of the dependence on the library are in decline, as is the perceived value of the gateway function. As new options develop, competition to fulfill faculty research needs is intensifying and becoming more complex. So the degree to which you would regard this as a competition, I mean, I know sometimes librarians kind of don't like that characterization of it, but at some level, you know, I think that you go to your faculty and key faculty and want them to advocate for resources for the library, and if they're using your resources less than something else, they might not say, hey, let's fund the library at this level. So there's competition to be valuable to your constituency, and that's the competition I'm trying to talk about here. And given that it's becoming more intense, and that a lot of the competition is with these large-scale, system-wide kinds of activities, what is the role? What is the proper role for access for the library in this environment? Should individual campus libraries compete for that gateway role? Or should collaborative groupings try to do so? And if so, how? And here you get to things like Open World Cat. Should there be a library catalog? Some of the kinds of questions that are actively engaged by librarians. I'm going to pause there for a minute and see if anybody wants to, you know, take a shot or has comments or wants to ask some questions about this first section.
Kevin, research means faculty members' own research, not so much the research they're helping their students to do.
Yes, I'd say so. I mean, I think the way that the way that the whole overarching survey was positioned was that there were sets of questions that were specifically around teaching, but I'm not highlighting those questions. So these questions are definitely oriented toward the faculty conducting research. Oh man, too big a room, too many people. Yes.
Well, as one of the economics librarians.
All right, this is going to be great. I got more. It's coming.
I totally agree with what you presented, except that I think there's one small segment of them, and those are the economic historians.
Mm-hmm.
That in the larger group, their behavior is very different.
Mm-hmm.
They're more book-oriented. They still see the library building as the library staff.
Mm-hmm. They were big JSTOR friends in the early days.
Yes. I think it's also, economics is also a discipline that for a long time has had an alternative way of exchanging information, and that's through the working paper series.
Yep.
And so they haven't been so as dependent on the library as the way to sort of find out what their colleagues are doing.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I think what you've discovered.
I think that you'll see. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It wasn't so much a question, but the comment was that he's an economics librarian and agrees basically with what's here. But that very important distinction for economists is that they've tended to use working papers in the paper environment. That was an important way of their distributing their work, and that's an important factor in how they've well, to the degree to which they already were not as dependent on the library as some other disciplines. Right. So the question, for those of you who might not be able to hear it over here, is has research been done on the difference between, or some of the new resources that are becoming available or have been available that are not library resources, not paid for, and how they're impacting the use of these types of materials. And I'm not aware of that research specifically. We've done some research in particular fields about the way materials are used, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But I think that is it's an important point. Clearly, that's just happening all around us. I mean, whether you're talking about data sets or even grayer literature that's being used that wouldn't have normally seen the light of day, which is now available on the web and people get at and find gems and find things that are important. I mean, it's happening all over the place. But I'm not aware of a systematic research approach to kind of get at that and quantify it or be able to characterize it in a specific way. But I think it's a great point. And one of the things I am hoping in this discussion, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research we're doing at Ithaka and some of the plans we have, getting feedback from you and input from you about things you think would be valuable, and that's a good one. Okay. Oh, I missed. Oh, got plenty. Yes.
The three categories are so important for the conclusions that you're gaining from it, and yet they're such broad terms. Did you have a good description for your survey participants on what you meant by archive and what you meant by gateway, or did you let them guess what?
We had a, the question is the three groupings, gateway, archive, and buyer, are very broad categories, and if they're interpreted in different ways by the respondent, it could end up skewing the results. I mean, I'm rephrasing. You know, we had a description. The key word is the adjective. Did we have a good description? We had a description of each of those as part of the survey. I don't remember it offhand, but we did try to define it. We obviously thought buyer was pretty clear. But I think you're right. I mean, you know, in any kind of survey, there's always that the respondent brings their own experience, and that's some of what could be there. And that's part of the reason we hire the survey firm. You know, they've told us that they think it's reliable what's coming back, and that those points are important. And putting them in those big buckets had some real value. And as we've done it year after year, one of the most important things is the change. I mean, we haven't changed the definition. Definition's been the same. We've asked a lot of people. We've got a lot of responses, and we've seen it 3 different times. So you start to develop more confidence in the respondent's reaction to it. Yes, back there, and then you, because she had her hand up first. Yes.
Do you have any data on graduate students? Very large.
Yeah.
Heavy, you know, because I think a lot of us have felt for a long time that graduate students are really the group that we're supporting a lot with both the collections, the library building itself, and all the rest.
Yeah, I agree. And the answer is no. This is about faculty. We've got a range of faculty, but you're right. It's very important. Graduate students are harder to get to, and we haven't included them. But graduate students and undergrads, we'd love to have more on that. Yes.
So that was actually
I didn't repeat the question. Sorry.
that I was going, but another way of getting at that, and I wondered if you know anything about the tenure or the age of the faculty.
Yes, we do. We did ask it exactly that way at the end. We didn't ask their age, but we asked how long they'd been in their positions, and generally things didn't move things moved generationally as you kind of expected, but not totally. Discipline had a big impact, and so it wasn't just the classic argument, we'll overcome this problem one funeral at a time or whatever. I mean,
Actually, the situation for the library use as an access point could be much worse than even your data suggests, because the older faculty are less aware of some of the electronic resources.
I think that there's we're talking about demographics and the age of faculty and the tenure of faculty and respondents, and whether that is skewing these results. And what I would say is that we have a real cross section of ages in these surveys, and I don't think it's skewed in that direction. We've got a lot of the young faculty, when they receive this, responded to the survey, so it's balanced in that sense. Yes, sorry.
Are you also looking at ways in which the expectations of how researchers conduct their work is changing? My sense is that the way faculty and researchers did their work maybe 10 or 20 years ago has dramatically changed from what's expected of them now. So the kinds of resources they access, and what they publish, what they use as their sources.
So the question is, do we have a sense that or do we get information about how the way that faculty conduct their research is changing, and how the access to resources is changing, and what that means for the faculty? And I'd say that we get that information in a certain way, but we haven't framed the questions in that way, and we don't have anything to share specifically about the ways in which it's changing. We've done some anecdotal work at Ithaka, not more rigorous surveying, but interviewing, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit for economics, but we've done it for biological sciences and economics and history, where we talk to faculty about exactly that kind of question. How is the work you're doing changing? how does that impact what you need, what you use, et cetera. And so we have some valuable anecdotal information, you know, kind of a story about that. But I wouldn't say that it's as rigorous as the kind of survey data that we have in this study, and I'll talk about that too in a minute. One of the things that we're really interested in at Ithaka, although I think it's very hard, you know, I just had a conversation with our research director, Roger Schoenfeld, who he really wants to do an study of interdisciplinarity and how the traditional disciplines are breaking down and the gray areas and everything. And I'm like, yeah, that's great, but that's, you know, everything is interdisciplinary at some level. And so we're trying to figure out a way to start to tackle that kind of problem, which I think is related to the question you're asking. Oh boy, I may have to move forward or we won't finish. One more.
This is a comment, but surveys that have been published in the library literature have typically revealed that faculty never regarded the library as their first place to consult. They consulted their peers before as a starting point.
The comment is that the library, according to surveys in the library literature, the faculty have never gone to the library first. They've consulted their peers first. The difference, I think, here, and we'll talk about this too, is that in the old days, once the peers told them something, then they came to the library to get what they needed. Now they get it through links. Now they get it through the network. So the peers drove them back to the library, but now they don't necessarily. I think that's one distinction. Okay, I'm going to keep going. You can help me, Bernie, because I like questions and answers. So a closer look at economics. The percent of economics faculty responding very dependent to 8, 9, and 10. How dependent would you say you are on your college or university library for research you conduct? We'll go, oops, wrong way. This is 2003 on the left, 2003, and we asked them both now and how do you think in 5 years? So how dependent would you say you are now and how dependent do you think you'll be in 5 years? So we asked in 2003 and then we asked 3 years later, not 5 years later, and the number was actually lower than what they expected it to be in 5 years. And in 2006, when we asked them about in 5 years, that was lower still. So similar story that we were saying before. The percent of economists agreeing strongly with, if my library canceled the current issues of a print journal but continued to make them available electronically, that would be fine with me. I'm fine with that. 8, 9, and 10, cancel them. I'm good with the electronic. So it's the highest number, but all these are relative. That's just the scale. To give you the scale, that 70% saying 8, 9, and 10. It's a very high number. Percent of economics faculty agreeing strongly with, if my library canceled the current issues of a print journal but continued to make them available electronically, that would be fine with me. This is 2003 to 2006. That's a big jump. Percent agreeing strongly with, regardless of how reliable and safe electronic collections of journals may be. So I'm good with the electronic. The electronic's fine. It will always be crucial for my college university library to maintain hard copy versions of journals. I want the paper. I want people to keep the paper. The economists, you know, they're starting to say, oh, I don't even care about that. You know, I mean, I get my stuff electronically. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily good, but I'm just saying this is where that discipline is. This is 2003 to 2006. It will always be crucial for my college university library to maintain hard copy versions of journals. Down. Now, in this, I don't necessarily see something bad. I actually see opportunity. Where I'm going with this economist discussion is what I said before. You might have an opportunity to think strategically with the economists about the best way to handle the transition, because they're open to new services, they need new services, and they're prepared to think about different ways of dealing with the print. This doesn't necessarily apply to Berkeley, which is the kind of a research library which is going to keep the paper and has that kind of wired in, but it's a broader question for the community. There are many libraries, as you may know, that are discarding journal back files and lots of materials and throwing them out and getting rid of them and not paying attention to whether anybody else is, or there's no sort of system to that. So that's what I'm getting at here, not necessarily Berkeley's approach to this. So here's what we did. We conducted in-depth interviews with 21 economists. We selected them, some graduate students, some distinguished faculty, you know, whole range, different kinds of institutions. We focused on their research activities, not teaching. And we did also similar studies in history and biological sciences. The distinguishing characteristic of economics, this is a working paper. Working papers have been an important part of economics for a long time. The NBER publishes National Bureau of Economic Research publishes working papers, and there's been an exchange of working papers for a very long time. Hal Varian, many of you may know. I put this up here because, 15 years ago, this did not exist, right? People don't think about this. What is this? I mean, this is his web page. I mean, it's a public publishing platform for one. He's branding this page with himself, with every article he's ever written. He's got links out to articles he thinks are important in fields that matter to him, all the books that he's written, books that he thinks are valuable. This is a publisher role. This is a library role. This is a faculty member going direct to his colleagues and to others. This is never, there may have been working papers before, but there wasn't anything like this. And I think, this is a simple thing we all take for granted at this point, but all the faculty are doing it, and it's a very important piece of what happens in economics. So keeping up and monitoring the field, what do faculty do? We've got this characterized on the left with what used to be and what's now. They used to browse the working papers in the library or departmental office. They didn't all get these working papers themselves if they had a big, and you had to be at a big university. You had to be at a place that collected these things. You had a big advantage, competitive advantage, if you were at a Berkeley, as opposed to if you were at some small college, because how'd you get the working papers, right? They would browse through those journals. They'd talk to their peers, et cetera. Now, there are these services like REPEC and SSRN. I don't know how many of you are familiar with them. Alerting services, sort of like also the at Los Alamos, what was originally the Los Alamos Physics Archive. Working papers get posted to a kind of low overhead electronic database. Alerts are sent out when you can develop a profile so that you're notified when articles pop into there that are probably of interest to you. The network effect, all the things that you see happening in Web 2.0 in a low-tech way are happening in these new types of services, and economists can stay up to date electronically with what's happening in their field. They still use the peer network, but the peer network is now facilitated by the networking capabilities, so they see a working paper, they see some references, they know they go right to, they Google that person's name, they get that page like Hal Varian's, they grab working papers from there. I mean, just the facility to be able to get at the material that would be useful to them on their own with no assistance of any kind is unprecedented. So what that means is that that this is part, in my view, this is the explanation for, it's not that the library's done anything wrong or hasn't provided useful services or valuable services. It's just that it's more competitive. If what you're saying is I want to be able to serve that constituency. So the secondary research process then is still, this is the then. Ask a colleague for recommendations or see an article and see references at the back of the article. They did search things like EconLit for materials, which is an A&I database focused on economics. And they sort of followed the references back, as I said before, to the library if they didn't have access to the journal directly. And now they're operating much more in the web-based environment, basically some of the same things I said a minute ago. So what I'm trying to say here is that the thing that I think is, I would want to go in and learn about the economists, but then I'd want to ask myself the second question, which is, are these folks different? I mean, is it that the working paper thing is what's driving this? Is that really, is there safety in that? Or are they predictive? They are moving, they have moved. I mean, their behavioral answers, even though they may have been dependent on working papers, they had a different view of the library in 2000 than they have in 2006. That is for sure. So if I'm a historian and all of a sudden all the materials that I need are available electronically and I can get to them myself, am I going to act like the economists are acting now? Or I'm going to act like the historians have always acted? It's an important question, right? I mean, and it prompts a question right away. Please.
It does, and it's a question I'm sure most people here have in mind, which is that one of the disciplinary features is the dependence on journals versus dependence on monographs. And historians often rely on monographs for their own argument. So how does, we're making a journals argument
Fair enough. And, you know, as long as the books are not available electronically with useful tools, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think they're different. But the books are being digitized, maybe not perfectly, maybe not the way everybody thinks that they should be. And, you know, gosh, you know, the Kindle's not that great and e-readers really aren't that good. And, you know, I wouldn't really use them and all those kinds of arguments. But what happens if that's different? What happens if that's different? What happens if, you know, my handheld is good enough? So the question I'm asking is who's going in there and understanding what those changes are and what it means to serve that kind of user in this new environment. And when I go out and I talk to librarians, not necessarily in this room, and I'm not up to date with all the things that Berkeley does, and I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is not a kind of big, you know, criticism of libraries, because clearly libraries have done an enormous amount to facilitate a lot of this and have been key players in helping make it happen. But I don't generally see that forward looking, okay, this is what's happening. I want to be able to serve those faculty in the best way possible. This is what I have to do it. You know, and if I imagine, you know, 2011, what would my organization look like? What kind of people would I have in my organization? How would I have them structured in order to be able to serve that need effectively? I don't see that. I see, you know, you never get to serve. To use a tennis analogy, you're always receiving the serve. You play the whole game on the receiving end of the serve. Okay, so I better keep going. How long does this go?
11:30.
All right, 11:30. We're in good shape. So you know, one of the things. I mean, I didn't bring out a lot of the slides and the questions that were really just about. Hey, you know, the electronic world is here. I figure everybody's on with that already. But this one is interesting. It just says, who's going to become increasingly dependent on electronic research resources in the future? And these are extremely high numbers. These are, again, 8s, 9s, and 10s. Everybody just knows that this is where it's going. The traditional humanities faculty are slower, but even they are up in 60%. Now, so what I'm talking about now is I'm shifting away now from the whole access thing, and I didn't do that very carefully. I just kept going. So it's kind of a full stop. We were talking about access before. Now I'm going to be talking about the role of the library in the transition from print to electronic. So if everyone will accept that the electronic is coming, that people you know, really want to use that, obviously it varies in certain kinds of disciplines, but that's really important. How is that happening, and what's going to happen, and who's going to lead that? And it's from this part on where the title "Who's in Charge" it comes from, which is who's in charge of thinking about and preparing for this transition, and taking care of it in a way that is most effective for the community. So there was just to put a stark thing out there. There was a book about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago called Double Fold. Have anybody heard of that book? Written by Nicholson Baker. Yeah, it was well written. You know, maybe some people thought not so well researched, but very well written and provocative.
I've seen his mother-in-law in the room, but she might be here. Be careful with
No, I learned that lesson at Berkeley in the beginning. So no, the point is that there's truth in everything. That you can't get to where Nicholson Baker did if there wasn't some truth in what he was talking about. And the truth was, to put it in the most benign and positive way, is that local interests and system-wide interests, the tragedy of commons arguments, are often in conflict. And so, you know, if you don't really have perspective on the broader community, you're going to make local decisions, and those local decisions can often be counter to the interests of the system. So everybody discards their library collections, their newspaper collections, because they got them on microfilm, and everybody makes a reasonable local decision, and then you aggregate it all up across the system, and all of a sudden you got none. That's an extreme version of putting it, but extreme way of putting it. But my point is that if we aren't thinking strategically about that process at the local level, there's no way we can at a system-wide level. So this is the first point is, regardless of how reliable and safe electronic collections of journals may be, it will always be crucial for our library to maintain hard copy versions of journals. This is a faculty. Assuming that electronic collections of journals are proven to work well and are readily accessible, I'd be happy to see hard copy collections discarded. That was the one we had before. And the third one is, if our library canceled the current issues of a print version of a journal but continued to make them available electronically, that would be fine with me. Now, there are going to be a couple of other questions that we asked to faculty about archiving. And I think they're helpful, but I think one of the things they say is that the faculty don't really know. They're kind of inconsistent and they're confused. So, you know, I want the print materials no matter what. But if you cancel the current issues, that's okay with me. You know, so you see some of this where the connection between canceling the current issues and not getting the print, and then not having the print much later, isn't exactly being made sometimes. So what we also did, I mentioned earlier that we did library surveys as well, a library survey as well. So I'm contrasting here the answers of the faculty with the answers of the librarians. So here you see from the blue bars that the libraries are more prepared to make the transition, or are in the process of making the transition, than the faculty. So now the reason for this is money, I would say, that in a lot of cases, smaller colleges and universities, they've just gotten on with the transition because they wanted to save the resources from canceling their print subscriptions, et cetera. So regardless of how safe and reliable and safe electronic collections of journals, it will always be crucial for our library to maintain hard copy versions of journals. Assuming that electronic collections of journals are proven to work well and are readily accessible, I'd be happy to see hard copy collections discarded. You see the red bars are the libraries. And the third one is, if our library canceled the current issues of a print version. They match the faculty there. But in the first two, and those two questions, remember, are kind of mirror images of the other. They're complements. We're asking the question in two different ways. The bars go in the same way. So, you know, along with the difference in the question, I'm not explaining this very well. The point is, we ask the same question from the negative and the positive, and the bars look exactly alike. So the respondents understood the question and responded to the question, or you could say that they did. So the point here is just that the libraries are feeling a little bit more, are either feeling more comfortable or just acting in a way that is more accepting of the fact that this transition is going on than the faculty are necessarily expecting them to, or the faculty might want them to do. So we also asked a specific question, because in the first survey we did in 2000, we were vague about this, and we realized we needed to be more specific about whether faculty wanted their library to keep the print or some library to keep the print. You know, whether they were really thinking of it from a standpoint of, I want to get access to it here, or I want somebody to have the print somewhere, and more of an archiving question. So we asked, regardless of how reliable and safe, it will always be crucial for the college university library to maintain hard copy collections of journals at my library, and then we asked at some library in the system. And we saw a distinction there where some of the faculty were starting to think about this from an archiving perspective as opposed to just their own access. This point is just that research libraries in our questions, and research library broadly defined, large and very large are grouped together here. So not just the UC Berkeley's, which are research ones, but also doctoral granting universities in the Carnegie classification are in this. But the point being here that there are a lot of libraries that in the near future, it will no longer be necessary for our library to maintain hard copy versions of journals. That's a pretty high number. In the near future, 45% of those institutions in 2006, this is a year ago now, saying, I won't need to maintain hard copy versions of journals. So I think it just says that libraries are really preparing for the transition. We asked the question of faculty, regardless of how reliable and safe, it will always be crucial for our library to maintain hard copy versions of journals. And again, these are these high 8, 9, and 10 answers. You know, it's really just showing the same story of the disciplines that we saw before. So the point here is just the evidence of the transition is happening, and it's libraries are acting on it a little bit faster than faculty necessarily see. Faculty are less accepting than the libraries of the transition, but both are becoming prepared. Research universities anticipate this transition sooner. How significant is that is a question we're asking. And economists are least concerned about the retention of print. And so maybe there are some opportunities there working with the economists to imagine new scenarios for how access would be provided and how archiving could happen. So the question that we're thinking a lot about is who's going to lead this transition? Who's in charge? How are the print journal cancellation, deaccession, and offsite storage decisions made here at Berkeley and at other libraries? And how should they be made? Libraries, seems to me, could lead this transition by helping the faculty understand and prepare for this inevitable future, and to put forward proposals or strategies for how to make that change. So, I could imagine saying to the economists, okay, we're basically not going to have print in, pick your number, 2011. We're not going to have any print in 2011. We're going to just go electronic, and sit down with the faculty and in economics and say, how are we going to go about doing this? What would the steps have to be, both at Berkeley and at a system-wide level, to think about this and do this in a responsible way? Or, do that with a group of libraries. My frustration is that I think people are aware of this, but it's just like impossible for them to act on it. I think that's the thing I find challenging. So I throw that out there as a question, because it feels like taking a more strategic response is really needed, or we may end up, in fact, with a result we don't want. One of the questions that we're asking, and we have a study going forward, and actually it's a professor here, Candace Yano, who's doing it with us, is a kind of an information science question, which is how many copies of certain kinds of materials should there be in the system to give us confidence that we've got the complete run. So we know people are moving to the electronic. We know the electronic is more convenient. So take the JSTOR journals as an example. Some of you might know that JSTOR helped to fund and worked cooperatively with UC on the building of a print repository of JSTOR journals. And the idea was to take a strategic approach and a smart approach to make sure that we had pristine, complete, comprehensive copies of the JSTOR journals, because we knew people were starting to throw them out, move them off, et cetera, and we wanted there at least to be 2 copies. So we funded at UC and at Harvard, 2 places that had a lot of the journals, a process to create 2 dark archives of these journals. And so we knew they would be there. And at that point, we basically said 2. There are going to be only 2. Let's imagine a world where everyone throws everything away and there are only 2 left. So we were very demanding, and we were willing to pay for it, of page-by-page checking. So look at every page of these journals. Make sure not only that there's all the journals there, all the issues, but look through the pages. Well, there is a lot of missing stuff. There was a lot of material that we thought we had that wasn't there. Some of it, journal issue never came, nobody knew, got bound without the issue, just isn't there. So there were certain things, where in the catalog it says, I've got the American Economic Review from 1918 to present, but there's, not that kind of granularity in the check in, check out, et cetera, and stuff's missing. So that was one thing we found. Second thing we found, which is even more difficult, is pages, stuff torn out, things blocked out, written on, especially in journals that have illustrations, beautiful illustrations, gone. No real way to know that that's the case. So what we're trying to do with this study is to say, because this is a problem that can yield itself to science, in that if you have a probability or an expectation that in certain kind of journals it's more likely that a page will be torn out, you can design your system to have X number of copies, 8 copies, 12 copies, 15 copies, or whatever. You can think about this in a scientific way and develop a strategy for different kinds of journals of how many copies you might want to have. Well, there are some people thinking about what should be the system-wide number, but they're just kind of saying, well, it should be more than 1 and less than 10. Or that kind of thing. I don't think that's the way to go about it. So I think what we're trying to do is develop some science around that, and Professor Yano is working on that, and we call that the optimal overlap. And I think it's terribly important for some of the things that are going on with the mass digitization in books, because when that happens, I think knowing how many books we ought to have when people start moving books off campuses because they're available in a digital form will be important. Okay, so some questions about long-term preservation of electronic journals. Basically, the story here is everybody understands that as we move to electronic, somebody's got to focus on the electronic materials and keep them safe. I mean, the number's extremely high. The red bar is 8, 9, and 10, very important. In 2003, faculty thought it was very important at 74%. Now it's 82%. And the blue and the red go up to 97%. So everybody understands this. It doesn't really vary. A little bit by the very small institutions, doesn't vary by libraries, and it doesn't vary by discipline. I don't know if I brought the slide, but when you go through discipline, everything varies by discipline. But when you ask faculty about electronic archiving, it doesn't matter what discipline they're in. They all care about it. So this is the interesting question, which is consistent with my point earlier about confusion. We asked faculty how satisfied they were with the way electronic journals are being preserved for the long term. And we asked that in 2003, when nothing was being done, basically. I mean, there was almost nothing. And you know, there were 28% of faculty who were very satisfied with the way the electronic journals were being handled. And 92 were somewhat or very satisfied. And those numbers haven't changed much between 2003 and 2006. And frankly, it's just, there's no way for the faculty to really know. And in general, they know it's important, but they don't feel like it's their job to, I mean, I would say that there's no reason they should know all that. My point here is just that, you know, that's library's job, and it's librarian's job, and it's librarian's job to lead and to get and inform the faculty at a level that they need to know, and to take leadership on that question. And libraries have, and electronic archiving has become a significant priority for libraries. This is from our librarian survey, and it's, you know, both important now and it's going to be even more important in the future. The smallest libraries don't see it quite as much as their responsibility, and that's understandable. Libraries do expect, though, that print preservation work is going to decline. This question was, how important are each of the following functions of the library? Percent answering very or extremely important. This is preserving traditional library resources, i.e. print. So there's some sense that this is not a 2003-2006 question, but how do you feel about it now, the red bar, and how do you think it's going to be in 5 years? So there's a sense that librarians are feeling like they're not going to be as much in the job of preserving print in the future. It's more important in smaller institutions, but it's generally just expected to decline everywhere. So here I think the points are that the perceived importance of the print is declining pretty much everywhere, and especially at research universities. Faculty members in libraries have become more focused on the preservation of electronic materials. There's consistent confusion among faculty. How can libraries provide essential leadership for preservation? Consistent confusion just being that they don't really understand. It's not a criticism. It's not really their area. And how should this shift be managed strategically? Again, the same point I'm making, so that we can successfully manage the transition and not have a double fold kind of problem. So let me just touch a little bit on some of the research that we're doing. I mentioned the one thing before. Some of the comments I'm making about a sense that the community is not thinking strategically about this comes from work we've done over the last year. Roger Schoenfeld, our director of research, has traveled to 14 different campuses of libraries of all different sizes, and has talked to them about what are they doing with print. How are they making the transition from print to electronic? And so he's gathered information from all types of libraries, talked to them about how they go about the decision-making approach, and it's unanimously ad hoc and unanimously reactive. The history of first generation of print depositories is another project we're working on. It's kind of an interesting project. There was a series of print depositories in the 50s that really sort of, you read what they were trying to do are kind of similar to what is being discussed today as the transition happens with electronic. And there's some nice, interesting lessons about why those weren't very successful. A study of the shared print repository at UC that I talked about before, we're documenting that, writing that up, and I think it's being submitted for publication now. The optimal overlap project, which is the one I just mentioned, trying to bring some science to the thinking about how many print volumes are needed to serve as a foundation for preservation. And finally, we're initiating a study right now. It's not going to be an elaborate one, a kind of quick one, of corporate libraries. And what's happened at corporate libraries. I don't know if people recently saw that HP Labs closed their library. A lot of corporations have closed their libraries. Even institutions that are pretty research intense, closing their libraries. I think there's got to be something to be learned there. What did that look like? What did that process, how did that process happen when, as the library started to be less necessary or less useful in that kind of context? And I sort of have a matrix in my head which has sort of mission, if you will, and the degree to which the mission depends on research and knowledge, on one side of the matrix, and then the kind of organizational flexibility on the other side of the matrix. Very agile, very fast-moving kind of organization, high or low, and very much dependent on research, very high or low. And trying to map different kinds of organizations on that and kind of see where things are, because I think those are obviously those corporations that aren't research intense probably got rid of their libraries first, whether they were agile or they weren't agile. Those that are research intense and really need to be up to date on knowledge presumably would get rid of their library last. In the preliminary work we've done and some sort of the literature review and things, one of the things that we've seen is that those libraries that were more agile, that changed and developed new services, have tended not to be closed, whereas those that sort of were more built around the physical infrastructure did. And there are some examples, but I think it would be very interesting also to look at some of the new corporations like Microsoft, which supposedly has the largest R&D budget of any public company, or Google. What kind of libraries do they have? I don't actually know the answer to that question. Some of you might. But we're going to try to find out, and I think it'll be a very interesting thing to draw parallels between the history and what it looked like as the corporate libraries got into more and more difficulty, and whether we see any of those signals in the academic libraries. And my sense is that you probably start with the community colleges and start working your way up there, where they would probably feel a lot of similar pressures as the corporate libraries did. And there's been a lot fewer libraries that are members of the Special Libraries Association, and there's some things going on there. And I'll conclude just with one comment. I met about a month ago with Rick Luce, who's now the library director at Emory. And I say this stuff about the corporate libraries not to be negative for its own sake, but Rick was at Los Alamos. Many of you know some of the work he did there, and really transformed that library in significant ways to very much a very technology-oriented service provider to that particular specific, almost unique community. And I asked him what was the most important thing to helping him do that. He said, well, when I was hired, they said that they were going to close the library in a year unless we made some substantial, significant changes. So that death knocking at the door enabled him to go in and make changes that would have normally been resisted. I mean, that impending doom allows you to be flexible, and frankly, universities and university libraries, they don't have any reason to feel that kind of impending doom, or not nearly the same kind. And so at some level, I'm just trying to throw out some threats, hopefully that will help people be motivated to change, even though I know here at Berkeley, there's no risk of the library closing down in probably any of our lifetimes. But with that, I will close and welcome further questions. And I think we got like 20 minutes left to talk. So thank you very much. Yes.
Charles, and you'll start the model of identifying yourself.
Okay, Charles Pauley, the Bancroft Library. Going back to the beginning of your talk presentation, everybody realized that the buying function was important for libraries. Problem is, we can't afford it. So what's the solution long term?
I'm supposed to answer that. The question is, the buying function is not affordable. What's the solution long term? I think that my own view is that that one of the big problems is a lack of discipline in the market, a non-functioning marketplace, and I don't believe that myself, I don't believe the answer is open access in a pure sense, that it's all about open access. I think that the likely scenario is something that's a blended model, a hybrid model. I think one of our big problems is obviously that there's a lot of information, and if it all costs something, it adds up to a big number. But another part of the problem is the fact that there are niche monopolies, and that that certain charges have gotten very, very high for certain kinds of materials, and therein I think the open access movement plays a really important role in returning some market discipline that can help it be more sustainable. But at the end of the day, I think that content or materials that are valuable, that contribute to the mission of the enterprises, they need to be paid for. They need to be paid for in some way. Whether that happens on the supply side, as many people are arguing, whether that happens through a kind of circle of gifts kind of economy with institutional repositories making available materials at the supply side, and then people can find them. Even if that happens, I think that what you will then see is a layer of free materials and then a layer of paid-for premier services on top of those materials that places like Berkeley would have to figure out how to pay for. Their faculty would say, look, I can't find anything. I do searches. I can't find anything anywhere. Here's this service that helps me find what I need in field X. Please pay for it for me. And so I think that the issue really is going to be about how to get ways to measure the value of those materials, what they're worth, and hopefully having a marketplace that keeps the amount you pay close to the value of the materials. I mean, I wish I had a great answer. I think that I look at the television, quote unquote television industry, because it's not really a television industry anymore. I'm not a believer that free is always the best. The kind of choice that we have now in television, we pay for some on cable, we pay for some pay-per-view, we get some for free, and the whole mix of those creates a richer, more valuable experience, and I can choose to pay for what I value. And I think just of public television, which I think is wonderful, and I think about the fact that now there are probably 30 channels that I get that provide the kind of content that I used to see on public television, History Network or Discovery Network, et cetera, that I value greatly, that wouldn't be there were it not for the fact that there were subscription and pay models that exist to help fund those enterprises. So my answer is that I think that there is going to be a need to continue to pay, but that what we need is a hybrid model that has everything from free to various kinds of paid content, and we need better ways of valuing what that content is worth. Yes.
Chuck Ekman, Director of Collections here. This is sort of a follow-on to Charles' comment, and I wonder if you're willing to say anything about the science return to JSTOR at this point, and how it might relate to that economics issue, since many of the publishers are marketing their back files. These back files are expensive sets that in many cases replicate digitization efforts underway, and what you can say about how the deal worked out, because many of us are concerned that this is a model for what may be happening in the future, as obviously you are.
Well, I mean, I can't say much. I think that when you say this is a model, what do you mean?
Well, the worry is that many of the commercials are looking at their back files and marketing them, and what they're doing is they're creating digital versions that integrate into their interfaces that have value-added layers of service that they're going to market to our faculty. And we've, in many cases, committed to working with other ventures like Google or OCA or internal efforts or JSTOR to provide access to our back files because we've already acquired it. So the real question is, how do we balance acquisition of new current content to having to repurchase the value-added features that these publishers are providing? And if AAAS can say, we're going to do this premium thing and withdraw it from that archiving function that all of us have contributed to through the membership in JSTOR, we have a serious economic budgeting problem.
Okay, so you heard the news that they're back in, right? Yeah. So So I mean, I think we all heard the message. I think JSTOR heard the message. I think the AAAS heard the message, and we basically the science and AAAS will continue in JSTOR just as it has always been. That's one kind of answer. That we think that's a great result, and we're very happy about that. The other point I would say is just, you know, this is the marketplace, and you know, you can choose to support JSTOR, you can choose to support the AAAS backfile, and you know, if JSTOR doesn't, you know, is not valuable enough, if the AAAS content adds a lot of value for the faculty, and JSTOR does not. I mean, what I'm saying is that pressures JSTOR to continue to evolve and to continue to innovate itself. I mean, it can't just continue to provide exactly the same thing. And so I think that that kind of pressure, while sometimes uncomfortable in a certain way, is good. I mean, we feel a lot of pressure at JSTOR to do more. You know, we feel pressure in the open access movement. I mean, we're really stuck, right? Because, and I don't mean that in a negative way. We're in between two things. We've got publishers on the one side who are, you know, they want to maximize the revenue they generate from their content. All publishers do. And JSTOR has relationships with them. And you have the open access movement on the other side. It's trying to make everything freely available. And JSTOR is in the middle. And what I would say is that presents, you know, I think healthy challenges for us to continue to evolve and develop resources that are valuable to the community at the level that people are willing to support it. And you know, I think that we don't have really much better ways right now to put a value on something than price. And it's, you know, I at some ideological level, I wish everything could be free. But there are also a lot of unintended consequences to that. And I'll give you another example. We're working hard on this project at Ithaka called Ithaka, where we're trying to be able to put primary source materials that are all over the world that are about from Africa on the web. And you know, our initial approach to that is a subscription model for a part, even though we know it's not JSTOR, it's never going to cover its own costs. What I will tell you is that if we were totally grant funded, and we didn't have a subscription model out there. When we had the subscription model, we started to roll that out, and we made that available, and we talked to people about it, and basically the community said you know, they pushed back and said, you know, no, I don't feel like we need more if it's going to be this much, or we need it to be different. And frankly, without the discipline of that, you know, if we had grant money, we could just put up what we put up. There's a value in the marketplace saying, well, no, you need to do it differently. And the way that they can vote right now is with the subscription. So I'm getting on a little bit of a rant here, and I'll back off. But I think what we need is a mix. And with respect to the AAAS and science, I'm extremely happy that we were able to work that out, and that and I think that it's something that frankly everybody contributed to. I mean, Mike Spinella, the executive director of JSTOR, did a phenomenal job. Alan Leshner, you know, worked with him very well. Alan's the CEO of the AAAS, and clearly the library community did, a pretty phenomenal thing. Those of you who don't know, there were something like 88 signees to a unanimous statement from the International Consortium of Library Consortia. So that, you know, we all heard that, and I think that's, for me, that's an example of the community standing up and talking about it, not because it benefits JSTOR. This is a victory for the scholars and libraries and users. I mean, and it made us work that out. Yes.
I'm Paul Holmberg, and I'm the librarian for the Judaica collection. You hinted at this before. With the growing, I want to know whether you asked the faculty about their feeling of competence in the ability to find the materials that they wanted to find, and whether they feel sometimes overwhelmed by this enormous amount of things that are out there, and do they know how to find what they want to find, and are they satisfied with what they are?
We did ask those questions, and we asked them over the period. And so like in 2000, it was like, woohoo, man, we got all this stuff, you know, and there's all this great material and we're getting a lot of things. And in 2006, it was like, whoa, there's, you know, a lot of stuff. We asked questions like, are you frustrated? Do you feel frustrated? And there was a lot more frustration coming through in the 2006 survey. And, you know, that's some of where my I didn't repeat the question, sorry about that. That's some of where my comment came from about how, you know, you want to create these new services and new ways to deal with the faculty needs, and that even if they had free content out there, there were going to be these sort of other services that would have to be on top of that to help provide the faculty with assistance, because there is just too much information. So the question that was asked, whether we had seen or had asked questions about the level of faculty competence in finding the materials they want, and whether, you know, as the content became more and more, content, whether there was frustration in them being able to or not being able to get content that they wanted. Yes.
I'd like to ask you if you have more data, more information on the type of page that you showed on Halvarian. Did you gather information on how many faculty are actually putting their data together this way, their information, and how they're doing it? I'm wondering if this is into place for the library.
Yeah, no, I don't have that. You know, when we talk, oh, the question is, gosh, I can't do that, can I? The question is I showed a faculty webpage, Halvarian's faculty webpage, and do we have data on how many faculty are doing that, what percentage, you know, from what kinds of organizations, et cetera? And I think that would be really, really valuable. No, but the reason that I put that up is in the conversation with economists, you know, almost all the grad students and faculty we talked to said they go to those pages. You know, that they see a reference and they see a name of an author. They just Google the author and they go find this page or her page, and they work from there. It's an important finding aid for them. Yes.
I'm Sarah Monroe. I work at the teaching library. When you're looking at some of the data that you got from faculty about declining levels of dependence on the library and access to the library, do you notice any institutions in particular that buck those trends?
No, because this is pathetic. Okay, so I'm going to say that I only slept 3 hours last night, so that's my excuse. So the question is, in looking at the data of the way that faculty, you know, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Say the question again.
When you're looking at how faculty are talking about how they depend on the library, how they get access to material to the library, and it was steadily declining in most of the disciplines, did you notice any institutions in particular that bucked that trend? So the question is really, in this aggregate data, do we have institutional data that bucks the trend about faculty access? And the answer is no. I mean, we do know where the faculty came from, but we didn't break it down by institution. The most, you know, the most granularity we have is institutional type, because when you do these surveys, you have to have enough responses in certain categories for them to be statistically reliable. And so we tagged all these surveys by these kind of buckets in advance, and the most granularity we have is down to like very large, medium, et cetera.
How did you get faculty to respond?
Well, the response rates, frankly, are not, you know, this is business research. The question is, how did we get the faculty to respond to the surveys? And one of the things is that we sent a lot of surveys. And so there's a certain risk of response bias because we don't have, you know, 75% response rates on these surveys. We sent out 40,000 surveys. We got 17% response rates. So and this was for a paper survey that was pretty long. The firm we hired does business research. They're oriented toward doing research that's strategic in nature, and they do it quickly. So, you know, you go out with the survey in September and you have results in December. It's not like you go out with a survey and you work it over, you know, year or 2 years. So there's some upsides to that and there's some downsides to that. What I would say about this is that this is not intended to be research that, you know, we haven't tried to write an article that would appear in a scholarly journal about this research. This research is more business intelligence, strategic intelligence. And what we found is that by doing this over 3 different times, and you develop confidence after a while, there are things that I was just talking to Roger about this a couple days ago. There are certain things that we see in the data in retrospect, and we say, wow, they got that totally right. Where you just start to get some confidence. The firm we use are specialists in asking questions in a particular way and bracketing the thought that you're trying to get at in certain ways, asking the question in multiple ways to increase the reliability. But the response rate was like, as I said, about 15%. So we had something like, I want to say roughly 4,000 survey respondents, but we didn't create incentives. We didn't pay them or anything like that to get the responses. Yes.
My name's Marianne Mahoney. I'm a chemistry librarian. I have a question about the cost of archiving. And I think that you know that archiving is very expensive. And I was wondering if you had any models or any ideas or suggestions on how the cost of archiving could be shared among the community. That's the way I see it, especially in this area of transition that a lot of libraries could just opt out of.
Right.
We should just, leave it to someone else to worry about till there's just a few libraries left that can deal with it, and then they can't afford it.
Yeah. So the question is, we understand that the cost of archiving is significant, and what are we doing, and what kind of work are we doing to help deal with the cost of archiving, or think about the cost of archiving, and to recognize the fact that it could be something that could be shared across the community. Otherwise, there'd just be a few left, and they wouldn't be able to afford it. This, to me, is one of the biggest questions that's out there. There is an enormous free rider problem where libraries are all expecting that, smaller libraries are expecting that the bigger libraries will handle this problem, and as that plays out, it gets more and more expensive for the smaller number of libraries that are actively engaged. We are trying to work on that, both on the research side in terms of trying to raise the awareness around that problem. And we've taken one approach to that with the creation of an organization that Ithaka incubates, is trying to get launched, called Portico, which is doing very well at tackling the electronic journal archiving problem. And basically the core of what we're trying to do with Portico is, at its very essence, is exactly what you just said, is to try to create a service that everyone could contribute to at smaller levels. That would be that will give us all an infrastructure archival layer that would allow us to make the transition. I think that there are debates, and reasonable ones, about what's the right way to do that, whether it should be a central archive or something that's a distributed archive, and we could talk about that. But to me, the essence is that we need to try to get everybody contributing. And one of the frustrations that I have, and not in a self-serving way around Portico, but one of the frustrations I have with the lack of strategy oriented toward the transition is that the reality is that there are some resources that can be made available. They're not necessarily terribly fungible, but as you make the transition, there are resources that you don't need in the electronic world that you need in the print. And there are savings to be had that could be reallocated toward a system-wide approach to archiving. And whether that is the archiving of electronic materials, as in the case with Portico, or a strategic approach to the print problem. So if you decided that the optimal number of repository was 10 or 9 for some set of materials, why should just those 10 pay for that? And if in the transition, you were strategic about it and were able to pull these things together, if it cost $10 to do something before, and now it can cost $4, well, if you don't save $2 of them and use them for that other thing, they're going to get all used up on local things. And I think that's really one of the big risks of this, is that nobody has money just laying around. And so as there are savings that happen, those get repurposed instantly. When there is an opportunity, if one is strategic, to take a piece of those resources at any kind of library and say, of course it didn't make sense for you to play a role in archiving in the world that existed before, because the only reason for having print was to provide access to it, really. I mean, that was what drove it. Now, you can get access anyway. But if you're a small college, can you afford to contribute $2,000 a year or $1,000 a year? And if you get 5,000 colleges and libraries all over the world contributing to that, you can start to pay for the electronic archiving. That's the kind of issue we're trying to address. But I think it's even if it makes logical sense, there are a lot of practical obstacles, whether it's budgetary stovepipes at individual institutions, competitive issues among different types of institutions that are not easy to overcome. And so there's a real risk of a kind of a combination of free rider and tragedy of the commons problem that makes it so that resources might be harder to find. Because I think that archiving electronically at one place is actually more expensive than doing it in print. But across the system, it's less expensive because you've got the economies of scale that drive a Google.
Kevin, we're going to let you go. I want to thank the audience for what I think were really excellent questions. And if you didn't get to any other aspect of this topic, next Tuesday, Peter Brantley from the Digital Library Federation will be here. And he's a really good target for questions about what the largest institutions are doing on some of these challenges that Kevin's laid forward. Thanks again.
Thank you.